Let's bring in former Council of Economic Advisors Acting Chair Tom Philipson and Committee to Unleash Prosperity co-founder and co-author of The Trump Economic Miracle, Steve Forbes. Tom, broadly speaking, the United States has much less to lose. Steve, what'd I say?
Forbes.
Steve Moore. Love you. Thank you.
Hey, that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about me.
Thank you, Steve. You're very kind.
Equally good looking, right? Yeah.
Yes. Tom, the United States has less to lose. Canada and Mexico have a great deal more to lose with these tariffs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the way I think about that is that the Trumpian way of using tariffs is sort of like Reagan's peace for strength in regular military war as opposed to trade wars. And the Colombia experience that we had this last weekend is a perfect example of that. But if you take Reagan's approach, we built up a huge nuclear program that we haven't used for 80 years, but it was a threat essentially to get what we wanted. Using tariffs as a threat to get what we want was exactly what happened with Colombia last weekend, essentially. And it's a much cheaper threat than military threats, because we spent about 14% of our federal budget, or more than 3% of GDP, on building up our military. We have a working economy, so if you're just threatening with tariffs without using them, it's essentially a free threat. And I think that's the sort of strategy that's taking place here. And we're going to see a lot of concessions coming out in the next week or month from Canada and Mexico.
But Steve, the president has said what he's trying to do is prevent illegal immigration and the scourge of fentanyl and other drugs that are just pouring across that northern and southern border.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole purpose. Go ahead.
Most of what Tom Philipson just said, I think he's a great economist, by the way, better economist than I am. But I would say one thing in kind of response to what President Trump is doing, and that is, you know, is Reagan's vision that North America could be one large free trade zone. And I still like that idea. I do worry a little bit about if we impose this tariff on the oil that's coming in from Alberta. You know, a lot of the gasoline in the Midwest, that's oil that comes in from Canada. So my worry is that it's going to be a tax on American motorists, especially in the Midwest, who depend on that oil to fill up their tank. And I wonder if people are going to be a little bit angry if they're starting to pay, 30 or 40 cents more a gallon for their gas.
But Steve, before we move on, you know President Trump, and you know one thing: he only wants prosperity for the United States, and he is laser focused and acutely aware how every move he makes might impact the American people.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I just got together with President Trump this morning, and you're quite right. He's laser focused. He knows that I don't entirely agree with him on the tariffs, but I think there's no question that if Trump can prevail here, and Tom Philipson is right, Trump does use tariffs effectively. But I think that Canada is such an important part of our economy. I hope that this is a temporary tariff, not a full-time tariff.
Yeah.
Tom, let's go. I want to move on to this federal judge who granted a restraining order temporarily blocking Trump from freezing federal funding. I think there has been some confusion. I know Stephen Miller at the White House has been out trying to clarify this. But what's your take on this? Because, look, there's got to be some rational way that the federal government, the White House, can block all these grants, NGOs, crazy money going overseas. You should be able to control that. That's what a chief executive officer and a president is supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I'm not the legal expert of what sits in Congress versus the executive branch and controlling, but I think this is just a hiccup in terms of the long-run experience here, which is going to be that the White House essentially is going to try to control what they can. This is a huge deal. I mean, for the states, it's a third of their revenue roughly that comes from grants, and $1 trillion in total. But it's mainly Medicaid, education and transportation. But there's a lot of Medicaid misallocation where ineligible people are receiving Medicaid. That is, able people are basically not working to get Medicaid instead of through their health insurance at work. And the Paragon Institute has basically shown that there's a lot of mismanagement of that program, which is the biggest program on the state level coming from the feds, that can certainly use a look over in terms of how spending is allocated.
Well, and I think slowing down some of that spending going on overseas, as they've highlighted, is really one of the goals, Dagan.
Steve, where does it say that the president is responsible for that the money has to be spent with speed? That there is a timeline on, because again, the memo's been rescinded, but where does it say that you can't slow down, say, a grant?
Yeah, this is no way to run a company. It's no way to run a country. I think anyone with any common sense would agree, just because, let's say, Congress appropriates $1 billion for a project, if it costs half that much, you don't spend the whole $1 billion, right? This is just common sense. And yet that's exactly the way, I mean, you know, you were in Congress. It's the way these rules work. And I guess what Trump is saying, we got to fix these rules. We're borrowing $2 trillion a year. We're going to go bankrupt with these idiotic rules. We need a line item veto for the president. We need for him to have something called impoundment power when he can spend being allocated. That's just what, again, it's just common sense. And I'm so frustrated that these congressional rules prevent him from saving money.
Yeah, and by the way, if you're accepting massive amounts of money as your nonprofit, you're not an NGO, a non-government organization funded all by the government. That doesn't seem compatible to me. But I want to move on. I want to talk about big oil because they're expecting big returns under President Trump. And Chevron's CEO, well, he's optimistic on the future and sees growth in the Gulf of America. Yes, that's what he called it. Mike Wirth joined Mornings with Maria. Listen to what he had to say.
For years, I've been calling for a more balanced conversation about energy. Now we're actually beginning to have it. We saw a lot of mixed signals over the last few years, and the agenda really was one to try to put pressure on the oil and gas industry, which is a vital part of our economy. And we can use American energy abundance to drive American AI leadership. And I think that's a clear part of the president's agenda, and we certainly support that.
Tom, then Steve, just very quickly, your thoughts on what the Chevron CEO had to say.
Yeah, I think it's time for this balance to come, essentially. I think, green energy is more expensive than brown energy. Otherwise, the market would have gone there a long time ago, essentially. And the fact that we're subsidizing it down is just meaning that we pay in taxes for it as opposed to at the time of purchase. So the total price is still higher. There's no free lunch when you have a more expensive energy source. I think the push should be towards innovation as opposed to trying to tax people to take on more expensive energy.
Steve, your take on it.
Yeah, we have more oil, gas, coal than any other country in the world. And what Donald Trump is saying is we're going to use it. And by the way, I'm not so sure the oil company is going to make all that money. The oil companies did great when Biden was president because he restricted the supply and the price of oil went way up. I think you're going to see the price of oil come down and we're going to pay less. I think we're looking at $2 to $2.50 a gallon gasoline if Trump does what he says he does.
The oil companies were being threatened privately by everybody in the Biden administration, for the most part, the way that they did with the tech companies. And they just kept their mouths shut because these are public companies and they were afraid of the retribution, the greater retribution. So I'm waiting to hear the stories, the real stories about the threats and the shouting that was done and threatening to put them out of business. So Steve Moore, Tom Philipson, great to see you both. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks, guys.